Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm very excited that you're able to join us on this weekly conversation. My name is Matt Fulton, and I am the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Polco. Today, we've got an excellent panel of local government leaders who are going to be sharing their perspectives on maintaining a sense of community in this really challenging environment that we all find ourselves in. We're going to be talking about the challenges that communities have been running into with engaging their constituents and their residents in a meaningful way, and really kind of learn a little bit more about the creative ways that they are finding successful engagement opportunities with their residents. The intent of these conversations is really about sharing perspectives with all of you and people who are running through the same issues. The hope is that you'll pick up something that can help you in your communities, hear about creative ways and creative solutions that you can take into your own operations. Here's the format that we're going to be following today. We're going to take a few moments to introduce the panelists, and then I will kick off the conversation and asking questions about these engagement strategies and how you can do this authentic engagement in the communities. And then if there's any questions following these questions, I'll allow the panelists an opportunity to ask each other questions that might have been prompted during the course of the conversation. So if that's okay, I will go ahead and kick into the introductions. I'm really happy to introduce Silvia Avendano-Curiel, who's a grant specialist with the city of Boulder. Silvia was born and raised in Mexico City until the age of 13 when she immigrated to the US along with her siblings and her mother. She's a Daniels Fund Scholar, which afforded her the opportunity in earning a bachelor's degree in international studies and gender studies and 2 minors in Spanish and French from Colorado State University. Her journey in social justice, advocacy, and social work began in 2009 when she served as an advocate for underrepresented domestic violence survivors at a local nonprofit, and then as a school-based family and services coordinator for families of all backgrounds. She's a passionate, committed, and energized to work alongside all stakeholders in creating intentional transformation in all areas impacting communities and stakeholders. She's been afforded privileges in this country and feels a great sense of responsibility to do her part for the next generation to continue to serve, inspire, and elevate more voices. That was a great bio that you shared with me, Silvia, but I would love to hear a little bit more.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Silvia Avendano, and I go by she, her, hers. I currently work for the city of Boulder as a grant specialist and as an equity ambassador as well, and I've been working with the city for 7 years. And really the first 10 years after graduating from college has really been in grassroots community work and supporting families navigate the system, navigate medical, educational system, and really from that learning how much government takes a part and really plays a huge role in how people live every day, how people interact with policies that we have in place every day in our communities. And so switching onto this role that I am in now has been really impactful and really powerful to be able to connect even across directors of community organizations within our city, also across other cities in Colorado, and just being able to see what's the impact and the change that is really required in our government systems to really dismantle some of the barriers for a lot of our communities. So excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Silvia. I really appreciate you being here. Let me introduce my second panelist, second panelist, who's Michele Lieberman. Michele is a county manager in Alachua County, Florida. She graduated from the University of South Florida with a Bachelor's of Art in Criminal Justice and received her Juris Doctorate from Stenson University. She joined the Alachua County Attorney's Office in 2014 as a county attorney and then became county manager in 2018. She is currently the president of the Florida Association of County Managers and is immediate past chair of the Executive Council of the City, County, and Local Government Law section of the Florida Bar. She also serves on the Florida Bar Board of Legal Specialization and Education. Michele, I thought that was a very interesting career path that you've taken, and would love to learn a little bit more about your background and your experiences.
Yeah, well, I have 20 years plus experience as a local government lawyer. As you stated, I came here into Alachua County to be the county attorney when I was appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. And as circumstances had it, the county manager was no longer with the county, and they asked me to do it on an interim basis and eventually to stay. So I think it gives me a unique perspective after being, the attorney for so many years in local government law in other communities, and then here as well, to then go to the operational side of things.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it's not an abnormal path or an unusual path. There are a lot of attorneys that have transitioned into the management form. So appreciate that legal background, though. It certainly is helpful in the world of government management for sure. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to introduce Natasha Hampton, who's the Assistant City Manager in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Natasha and I have had an opportunity to meet each other in the past, and she's a #1 best-selling author and dynamic voice in the arena of thought leadership and women's empowerment. She's a multi-award winning public administrator. She's got over 2 decades of executive government experience at the executive level in Florida and in North Carolina. She's been recognized many times. She's been on the South Florida 50 most powerful and influential leaders, South Florida's 25 most prominent and influential women in business. She's a League of Women in Government Trailblazer finalist. She's got a lot of recognitions that too many to announce in a short bio. Natasha brings innovation and transformative management to urban governance. She's got a master's degree in public administration and a bachelor's of arts in political science and public administration. And her mission is to boldly lead as the re-engineer of thought. Natasha, thank you for taking some time to be here, and would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Matt, so much for the opportunity to be here and to be here with other women in leadership. And in fact, it's my passion, women in leadership, and as well as public service. And again, been in municipal government for over 2 decades in Florida and North Carolina, which has given me a very unique perspective in public service, particularly in such unique times as we are right now. Right now I'm studying a lot in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and heading into the next chapter of my life in terms of writing my next manuscript, Beauty and the Bias Beast, looking at gender equality and subconscious bias relative to gender. So that's the next chapter for me. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to have this discussion with you and these women in leadership today.
Well, thanks, Natasha. And all of you, I just, having gone through this brief introduction, it is an outstanding panel with just wonderfully qualified professionals in local government. So thank you for being part of the conversation. Let's kick off into the conversation a little bit deeper. The topic of the panel conversation is maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. You know, over the past year, the pandemic has just totally disrupted all of our lives, not only from an organizational perspective on how you deliver public services, but also from a resident and a businesses and every aspect of your local community. Everything has been disrupted, and you have had to operate in a totally different way. Given this unsettled environment, it really seems to be more important to be focusing in on how do you maintain that connection with your residents so that there's an authentic two-way interaction and a feeling of being part of the community. And of course, residents want to make sure that they feel like they're part of the decision-making process. But the pandemic creates a certain set of challenges that really impacts residents' ability to maintain any kind of involvement in their local governments. And so the idea today is to get your perspectives on what are you doing to address that particular challenge. Maybe just to kick it off a little bit differently, I think as a city manager of over 30 years, I have always found engagement to be a challenge. Just the way the local government is organized sometimes creates its own barriers to helping people become involved in the things that impact them on a daily basis. So it's probably not surprising for me to share with you that about 80% of today's adults have never even attended a city council meeting. And there's lots of reasons for that. But now you throw on a pandemic where people are operating out of their homes, trying to maintain their jobs while they're homeschooling their kids. The fact that all of the local governments are organized and operating in a virtual capacity, although fortunately it sounds like many are coming out of that process. Everybody is having to adapt to a new world. So we are really interested in trying to hear from all of you about how do you successfully engage with your residents in such a divisive, disrupted kind of environment, and what's working with you and for your communities. So how do we become better listeners and engage the community in a meaningful way? We're going to be asking 3 questions to each of the panelists. And the first question is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? The second is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And then finally, which tools are you using to measure feedback from your residents so that you get a sense for how you are performing? So with that, I'd love to just kick off the questions. And Silvia, we're going to start with you. Would you mind sharing with us how Boulder's communication and engagement strategy has evolved since the beginning of the pandemic?
For sure. I think intentionality within all this is key. And I think that's one of the attributes or values that I think we've been leading with. This work for sure would not have happened. And I do feel like I have to mention a couple of people. My colleagues, Ryan Hampton and Brenda Rittenauer from the Community Engagement Office, who have just been key members in rolling this out, this effort, as well as having the support of higher leadership. So our equity program manager, Amy Kane, Pam Davis, our assistant city manager, and of course, Chris Menschuk as our interim city manager. And so having those people in our corner that's been very intentional, because what we needed to establish was not just establish, but identify the leaders who have already existed within the communities and really bringing them on board to see what's the expertise that they already carry with them. Who are they representative of? And making sure that the model that we created for the emergency response connectors and the recovery equity connectors was really something that we are able to learn from previous mistakes that the city, that we've made. And that it's okay to make those mistakes and be able to learn from that. And so this model, for example, the emergency response connectors and the recovery equity connectors really came out of the Boulder floods in 2013, where we saw communities heavily impacted, but we saw the access to resources to heal from that and really fix whatever was happening and whatever damage created. People who had the greater resources actually ended up having access to that. Whereas our communities of color, low-income communities were also affected, really didn't have the tools to figure out how do I navigate access to government resources in a way that it's going to be responsive. And so we really had to listen with intent. And so some of the strategies that we've created now is, for example, having a rapid response equity assessment. So going through 4 very simple questions that really align and really direct and guide the decision-making process across anything that the city ends up doing. And so that has been very intentional, very strategic. We also, like I said, we identified connectors and leaders within communities to get their perspectives who are already hearing and are already trusted members of their community and who just needed to build that bridge with us. And so these are stipend-based connectors. They're $20 an hour on average, around 46 hours a week. And that's really important, right? Because we often hear, either council people or board members or city government asking for people to come up and give us their expertise without actually putting a budget or putting an interest in paying back. And so this was important so that people knew that their perspectives and their lived experience is something that is valued and that is important. Every item that we do, for example, as we engage with public, is translated in Spanish and sometimes in our Nepali language, because we know that there's an important Nepalese community here. And we're also very focused on which communities are we actually reaching. very intentional about reaching the manufactured home communities and other low income and subsidized housing areas, so that those voices are really elevated, and really we listen to that. And ultimately, like I had said, just building that trust with city government and community has been really key, and understanding where the barriers for access is at, and being willing to adjust and adapt to what is needed. And I think this pandemic, there's been a lot of suffering, a lot of things that have happened. And the silver lining is that it has allowed us to do things differently because we had to. Whereas before, maybe there would have just been a little bit more hesitancy because we would have never done it like that. So,
yeah. Ana Silvia, I love the connector approach that you've taken and the rapid response equity assessment. Does that assessment process then feed into the connector organizations that you have for them to make to help make decisions on how to move forward, or how does that connected? How does the assessment fit into the process?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that we encourage for our colleagues or partners to do upfront whenever they're starting to make a decision. So just as an example, when we finally brought the recovery equity connectors together, we heard a lot, right? A lot of inequities within our school district and education were showing up, of course. People with more access to resources and money were able to create their own learning pots, whereas our other communities really lacked that and did not have access to it. So an example was the library was really trying to set up a program to support families with children home learning, with young children at home, to bring them to the library and create these mini pots for a couple of hours. We asked them to complete that rapid response assessment, and then they brought it up to the equity connectors, recovery equity connectors, and realized that the more they got into responding the questions and the more the connectors were thinking about their own lived experience and how it would work out for them, it turned out that this really wonderful, incredible initiative and thought that the colleagues at the library had wasn't actually going to be serving those who were most vulnerable, because it was actually going to be creating more burden for them to try to figure out how to get off of work, how to come and pick them up a child, like all the arrangements. And so that's just one small example where this assessment is created, is responsive, and then connectors are giving direct feedback as to why it will work or why it won't work, and why those lived experiences are so important to really listen to.
That's very helpful. Yeah, that's an awesome process and a well thought out process based on history, right? So thank you. Michele, could you share how your communication and engagement strategy has evolved in the county since the beginning of the pandemic?
Sure. So, we took from a lot of the different processes that we were already using to engage the public and really just kind of expanded those. We always welcomed our citizens, to contact us by phone or email or through our website. But, we really had to take that a step further with our citizens. Our meetings became virtual for a large part of last year. And so we had to come up with a new way to engage the public in our meetings. We actually found that we had more public engagement. At one point, at the height of the pandemic last year, we had almost 16,000 people watching a board meeting. There, you wouldn't have that many people sitting in your boardroom. So it really enabled us to access, provide government access to a large part of our community where we hadn't been before. And allowing people to call in as opposed to coming in. And now that we are back in person, we have kept that as a hybrid system. So we are still doing our meetings via Zoom so that we can allow citizens who maybe can't come, downtown to the offices to see their government in action can still participate in government. And it's been very widely received. We also engaged a lot of our community partners. We used our churches to help disseminate information to the public as well as to gather input from the public, because, we found that the one thing that people tended to continue to keep that connection with was their religious organizations. We also used our nonprofit organizations and, organizations, for example, we're a large agricultural community. So organizations that had contact with our migrant population in order to get messaging back and forth, and ensured that we had all of our messaging, particularly related to the pandemic, was also in Spanish, including using real-time closed captioning in Spanish for all of our board meetings, which we hadn't done before, and had everything translated into Spanish for all the orders and such. We created a dashboard that the county used to disseminate information, where one click you could go to different sites, you could get information on current real-time, numbers as far as, positive cases. So we created and that dashboard evolved over the year to add more and more pieces to it as we progressed through the year. And I would say one of the most important things we did was we ensured unified messaging. We have a lot of large organizations in the community, and we realized early on that we were all putting out different messages. And so we made sure to unify that message, and that way all of our citizens were receiving the same information.
Yeah, Michele, did your engagement with any communities that are within the county, did that evolve at all? Did you incorporate discussions with other cities or other organizations on that messaging?
Yes, we have 9 municipalities in the county, incorporated municipalities. We also have several very large organizations. The University of Florida is in the county, as well as the UF Health System, one of the largest VA hospitals. Everybody, the school board, of course, has a large number of employees. So we utilized the communications departments of all of those entities. They met at least once a week to discuss messaging. We also would come up with messaging themes that we all would jointly support, so that the citizens understood that this was we were acting in concert in our messaging as far as communicating the importance of masking and those kinds of things. We would put out joint messages between all of the major partners in the community.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Natasha, how did Rocky Mount's communication and engagement strategy change over the course of the last year?
Yes, Matt. So very much like Michele and Anna's organizations, we definitely had to really reach out to our partners in education, our federal and local and state partners, our housing authorities, our broadband task force, because in Rocky Mount specifically, we have an aging, heavily aged population, as well as a lot of digital divide communities. So we definitely had to make sure that we had partners working with us to put out the leveled communication to ensure that that communication was the right messaging, and that particularly as Rocky Mount is a lead agent in receiving millions of dollars in federal housing programs. For me specifically, it was about how can we make sure that these funds are not just used as they would normally be used, but to really look at how we, as a community, we're affected now as a result of this COVID pandemic, and how this will transform how we do business moving forward. And so as a policy decision, administratively, now if there are any developers developing in Rocky Mount in terms of housing or any type of development, there has to be infrastructure to support broadband in those developments. And so to use any of the federal funding that's supported in those programs, there has to be infrastructure to support that broadband infrastructure. So those were the things that we wanted to look at. Those weren't thoughts prior to this phenomenon that we saw as of last year and the year before. In addition to that, we definitely, with our council meetings, we too went to total online and live stream and saw a huge engagement there, and continued that now. And as we come back into in-person meetings, continuing those things that created that engagement, and going on ground, that kind of going back to that grassroots effort, going back into the community and giving that face-to-face. Word of mouth, of course, with the social distancing, but we find that in this community specifically, that face-to-face engagement was really, really important and key to staying engaged with our communities.
Are you doing a hybrid kind of a model now with your city council?
We do have some council that are still engaged virtually, and some that are back in chambers.
Natasha, how have you, similar to Michele, have you seen increases in the overall levels of participation and engagement?
Absolutely, absolutely. From both viewership as well as commenting. And Michele, I don't know about you, but that's sometimes seen as a great thing and not so much for some. But the commenting has increased exponentially. But that's a great thing, because we get to understand what the community is looking at and how they're understanding information and comprehending information, which gives us, from the communication standpoint, an opportunity to know what messaging that we need to send out and how we need to get information back out to the community.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the second question. Michele, how do you think engagement influences how Alachua County is maintaining its sense of community?
Well, I think that pandemic or not, community engagement, is part of the success of maintaining community. It was a little harder in a pandemic to do that. I do think that, by going essentially digital, using Zoom and those methods, we were able to continue that. And we actually have more than 30 advisory boards that also went to Zoom, that also saw a tremendous increase in people viewing our advisory boards and participating in that process. And I think it's critical, because you want to increase buy-in and keep citizens engaged in their government and allow them to play a role in the projects and programs that are going to impact them. Kind of putting everybody on the same team for a common goal helps with that sense of community. So, it enabled us to listen to a lot more people and have them engaged in their government.
A lot of times counties are kind of this hidden level of government. I think during the pandemic, it strikes me that because of all the social services that you provide and the mental health services, that you've become kind of more front and forward. Is that true for your county in your experience?
We provide a lot of those services already. Of course, they greatly increased in the last year. We had never stood up our crisis line. Our crisis line is always open, but we had never used so many people for such a long period of time as we had during the pandemic. I mean, they were stood up for at least a year and did see a significant increase in the outreach needed.
Yeah, we have found through our research that the demand and the respect and the trust for local government has actually increased during the pandemic. So I think because of some of the services that you're providing and the direct impact that it has on your residents, it just makes your role all that much more important. So thank you very much for that. Natasha, can you share with us how engagement plays into helping to maintain a sense of community in Rocky Mount?
Yes, definitely. Engagement, with that, it's about transparency, right? And so when you are engaged, it gives a sense of transparency. And that's really the start of governance and what I believe citizens want. They want engagement, they want transparent engagement, and they want to know that that their government is accessible to them as they are accessible to it. And so I believe that that's what governance is. It's about being reachable and the community being able to get the services that it seeks and that it desires and that it demands. and that the governance is about making sure that it does what it should do and all that it can do to make it as readily accessible in whatever method and means that needs to be for each segment of that community.
Is Rocky Mount a pretty engaged community already?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the more or the less opportunity in terms of there's so many varied means of communication, right? And I think that the less means you have, the more engaged your community is, I think, at least from what I've seen, because I have experience in both Florida and North Carolina. And Florida, it's so vast and diverse in both its communication capacity as well as its people. But when you have less diversity from a communication standpoint, I think people tend to cling to the limited communication means. So I think you have more engagement and a clinging to that limited communication capacity, which makes it a challenge for governments to stay engaged and to be that much more clear about its transparent philosophies.
Yeah, we always kind of share that engagement can't be a project. It has to be an organizational value, and you have to be intentional and transparent, all of the things that you just shared. So you're right on, and thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Ana Silvia, can you share with us how engagement has influenced Boulder's success in maintaining its sense of community?
Absolutely. I think I would echo what Natasha and Michele have said, but also one of the things that we're really seeing is knowing that our connectors are really the bridge to bring that sense of closeness to what actually government is. And so, for example, the recovery equity connectors, once 2020 was over, that really morphed into a program that we have now, which is the community connectors and residents. And so having the support again from higher leadership and council, that really allowed us to be even more intentional with how we were engaging the public in our communities. And so, for example, one unprompted situation or message that is out there is that one of our connectors in their signature, they have put, I'm a connector with the city of Boulder. If there's anything that you have concerns about government or anything you want to share, please let me know. And they're a trusted leader in their community. And so they can really hear those issues or trends being brought up to them and then bringing it up to us. And while we may not have the answers for everything, I wish I did, but I don't, I at least can be an open door and a source to try to figure out the answer to a concern or try to get another one of our colleagues to come to those meetings that we have. A huge part is that we're actually also meeting on a weekly basis. And it's not just to talk about business stuff, but to really get to know each other at a personal level. We laugh, we interact with each other, we tell personal stories, we connect, we have room to debrief, especially every single member in there really represents an identity of a community that we know are typically have been typically historically excluded. That's from immigrant, low income, LGBTQ community, older adults, people with disabilities. And so we really get to know each other on a personal level, and that really builds the trust. And that connection, it transfers from them as connectors into their community. And then they can really see that if they participate, they can really be part of the decision-making process or at least influence it. Like Natasha and Michele have seen, we've also seen engagement increase because there's less barriers that exist now than they were before. Speaking from my own perspective, even as an immigrant, I know that when I came to this country, even just thinking about, show up to a city council meeting and tell your opinion, it was like that requires me going into a government office and telling government officials what I think. That's incredibly vulnerable, incredibly scary. And so these platforms that are virtual now, that is more of a connecting place with people and is more relational instead of transactional, just feels more connecting and it feels safer to give your opinion, right? For example, we had one of our Nepalese leaders who was a community connector who's just amazing, wanted to bring into their community what is government? How does government work? And so when that conversation first started, we almost at the beginning, the meeting sort of was stopped because the community members were saying, well, actually, what are city services? What is government? What do they do? So even just from the very basic of what is OSMP, right? Open Space and Mountain Parks. What does the library do? What does it mean to be in code compliance? All of that. We really believe in building capacity and building just the knowledge on how government works. But then it goes back and forth is for us to really understand how do they engage with their networks? How do they interact with their community? Because the way in which we may always do it as a government standpoint is not always going to work. So how do we adapt to that, and how do we identify and remove those barriers so that there's really that trust building and that bridge and really intentionality around the engagement?
I really congratulate you on the work through the connectors process. That is such an innovative, authentic, and pure way to connect with residents of different population groups. How many people serve on the connector group, and does that evolve? And then just briefly, how does it feed into? Is there a staff liaison to the connectors group? Is there a logical or a set way that they integrate what they're hearing and connecting on, getting it into the processes that you have in place?
It's a really cool program, and so there's right now it's a program with 9 people, and all of these 9 members, like I said, are stipend based, so we pay them. And so they take time out of their day to interact with us. Right now, my colleagues Brenda Retnauer and Ryan Hanshin and I lead those groups on a weekly basis. We come with an agenda very loosely because we're also open to what they have to say to us. And so we have sort of updates. You know, some of you who are watching may even think, well, are these people who just sort of pass flyers and disseminate information? Yes, they do that, but it's so much bigger than that. The way in which they bring information back to their communities really however they choose to. It's not prescriptive. We really trust in them, and we really want to hear from them. And so always during meetings at the very end, we always ask, what are the trends that you're noticing? Any issues coming up? And there's been some things that have been brought up, thankfully, to those connectors that we've actually been able to address. And so just a simple example, there was a code compliance issue with we have a dark skies ordinance. So it's making sure that whatever lighting we have outside our homes doesn't emanate, if that's an English word, more pollution and lighting into the world. And so one of the things we were learning is that through our manufactured home communities, it was really confusing what that actually meant, a dark skies ordinance, and what they needed to do. And so unfortunately, they had a year of being sent notices. Code compliance was doing their job, and they're incredible partners in this. But all of a sudden, the year came, and because it's an ordinance, people started getting ticketed in the middle of the pandemic. And so that issue was raised through these connectors. And so we quickly mobilized to figure out, okay, what's happening? What's our understanding about it? What can we do about it? And so people who were getting tickets very quickly right away, our partners in code compliance really partnered with us and said, we'll remove the ticket. They just need to connect with us. They just need to come into compliance. The Housing and Human Services made money available to families who couldn't afford the fixture that needed to be purchased. And so that was also a very simple way. And so those are the little tweaks in the decision-making that we wouldn't have known that was an issue. And so we were adding burden to communities that were already stretched thin through the pandemic. And that would be the last thing any of us wanted to do. And so that's just an example of how the engagement is really a back and forth, and it's genuine listening. And I think we, as a society, we need to learn more of doing that listening.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is such a wonderful program, and certainly leads to building a sense of community. So congratulations. Let's rotate to the third question. And Natasha, I'd like to start with you. Can you talk about the tools that Rocky Mountain is using to get resident perspectives on performance and things that you're doing as an organization?
Yeah, I think that what we've learned in this pandemic and just generally is how perhaps we need to look at redefining and maybe perhaps enhancing the tools that we have, or maybe not, engaging what our community is thinking and feeling and talking about. I think that what we've traditionally, and when I say we, I mean governments, have traditionally done is rely, I think, a little heavily on social media. It was great when it first came out, but I think that there's maybe an over-reliance on social media, particularly when there are communities of aging populations, when there are folks that are not using social media, and there's a large population of people that were not gauging and understanding what the needs are. So I think that we really need to look at what tools are out there that can really help us understand what our community needs, what the needs are now today, because they change, and then help us to forecast what those needs are going to look like 1 year from now, because very often, too often, we've looked at 5 and 10 years, where we're living in an age where 5 and 10 years is too long to forecast now. We have to start looking at annual forecasts, and maybe annually is too long. We have to start looking at 6 months, annual, and then looking outward to see what our community needs are today, and prospectively, and what tools can help us to do that. And that's where I think not just Rocky Mount, but cities throughout. So that's where we are in terms of an organization.
Well, I would agree with you. As you think about how disrupted people's lives are, and now as the American Rescue Plan starts kicking in and providing resources to communities, I think and react to this, I think there's a responsibility that municipalities have, and local governments generally have, to demonstrate that money is being effective in meeting the needs of what is currently going on, which is totally disrupted, right? And so the priorities of last year are different than the priorities of today. And it's not so much what it is today, but as much as it is tracking it over time, which you brought up, but to have those tools in place. And I really do think that there's an overarching responsibility that local governments have, and would love to just get your thoughts on that comment.
Absolutely. I would, the evolution of our communities, let me start this. Let me preface this with our governments have not evolved with the evolution, the social evolution needs of our communities. We're still providing services based on the local government model that was originally developed and designed to service our communities. And that is still a need. But there are social issues that have evolved over time that are very complex, very diverse, and very unique to communities today, that our local governments, our communities are looking for our local governments to assist with, that we have not yet caught up and evolved to assisting, and we're just not there yet. And so, one, there has to be a decision made that we're going to be there in a way that our communities need us to be there today, and then equip ourselves from a philosophical and financial perspective to meet our communities where they are today. And we have to make that decision as local government professionals, as a business operation. We have to meet our communities where they are today. It is very different from where we are when we're talking about the legalization of marijuana, when we're talking about same-sex marriages, when we're talking about gender equality, pay equality, when we're talking about all of the unique and sophisticated social needs that we have today. Our local government have to equip itself with meeting those needs. And that is the financial obligations that we have to prepare ourselves for, and we have to get there. And that's the journey right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. The intent of these conversations is to spur new ideas and new conversations. And I think what you just stated is going to be one of those ways that communities will start to talk about the model that we use in local government for serving today's contemporary needs. for folks. So thank you for that perspective. That was very good.
Yes, thank you.
Ana Silvia, can you talk about the tools that you're using in Boulder for getting resident feedback and input on your performance?
You know, it's in my experience that often in this dominant culture that we live in, we put so much weight and importance on data, collecting data. Like we need the numbers. We need the graphs and all of those nice looking pies in order to justify an expense or a budget, things like that. While that is so incredibly important, we also through this Connectors program really had to make sure that what was really important to capture was the lived experiences of our community members as well. That is just as equally, and if not sometimes even more important than the actual numbers. And so we've conducted surveys. For example, we conducted a survey recently because in order to determine, according to the residents, what their top council priorities would be so that we can give that feedback back to council. And so that's through surveys, that's through a Google form. We did focus groups. During our weekly meetings for our community connectors, we just keep a Word document where we take qualitative notes of literally what they're hearing and what trends are coming up. We make sure that within that we protect confidentiality. So it's not in a document that says, well, so-and-so said that this is an issue with this community. It's a very general, like this community is seeing this trend. Because we're not in the business of trying to figure out, well, who said what? Because, you know, if anybody ever requests that, then people can see, oh, well, it's that person who said this, and maybe it's that person's, you know, special situation. But it's really honoring that lived experience. We, of course, will ask for standard demographic questions to ensure that we're actually hearing from people and who we're not hearing from, and how do we need to adjust in order to engage those community members. It's also trying to figure out, you know, as a single mother of 3 kiddos, home learning and all of that, and then being active in other areas professionally and other initiatives personally, when at the end of the day, if I'm being asked to complete another survey, like I'm overwhelmed. I'm done. I don't think straight. But if someone were to call and say, can I just have 15 minutes and you can tell me what it's like to live in your city? Just tell me what it feels like. What's your experience like? Then I'm very much, my philosophy is very much, let's be relational versus transactional. Because relational, that's the trust building, that's the engagement, that's the really intentional and authentic listening that needs to happen in order for us to actually create this systemic change and to really empower individuals who live within their communities to feel that their voice is actually being heard and that it matters. It matters for them, and it matters to us, it matters to government, what their experience every day is really like, and what can we do to really influence that change? Because I think it really needs to happen. I see it sort of a sandwich, and very much to what Natasha was talking about, sort of on this grassroots level of mobilizing people, but it also requires this top leadership and really activating change within that, so that both is really, they're doing it synced and aligned, and it's not, well, let's just take care of the grassroots first and then policy and level, high level decisions.
Ana Silvia, other than the Connectors process is such a innovative and great way for building community. Outside of that process, what would you recommend to other local government folks that are going to be listening to this panel conversation about what is really working successfully in Boulder for getting resident feedback? What would be one other way that you would recommend local government leaders pay attention to?
I think it's putting yourself back into a situation where if you did not know anything about government, if you were in a brand new country, you want to know how government actually function somewhere in Europe, really having that mindset and to really think, if I were to request some sort of license, or if I wanted to give my lived experience to council, how would I really access that? And thinking from that mindset shift can really support and maybe help individuals see where some of the gaps or the barriers that exist. Because sometimes when we are so deeply involved and have been working for government, we stop thinking about that. We stop thinking innovatively. We stop thinking that other people do not feel as connected as we are, because we work in it, we breathe it every day. But what does it look like for a brand new person? So if you are a brand new person, what does it look like for you? And if it's overwhelming already, you don't even know where to start, then that's where you start. How do you not make it overwhelming? And how do we actually, one of the reasons why I love this country and why my mom believes so much in the American dream is it is a government for the people by the people. What does that actually look like in a place where there's equity involved, there's intentionality involved, and there's an acknowledge that not everyone has the same access to the same information and the same resources. And what is our responsibility to actually change that and make it more dynamic?
That is an outstanding perspective. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Michele, can you talk about the tools that you're using in the county for measuring resident feedback?
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. I too suffer from issues with rural broadband in our community. We do rely on quite a bit on social media. About 1/5 of our population are students at the University of Florida. They have well over 50,000 students. So we do rely a lot on social media, and we use software actually that data mines social media and gives us feedback on posts that mention, that mention the county, mention initiatives the county is doing, because we can do them by project. And we use that information to gauge whether our messaging is positive or negative, and to maybe reach out to areas where maybe they're not clearly understanding what we're trying to accomplish. We also, similar to what's been said, we've also done a survey recently, as a matter of fact. We partnered, there's a state-created entity called Well Florida here, which is a statutorily created health council to do consulting work in health areas, and we use them to do a survey of our population on vaccine issues. And in 2 weeks, we had more than 7,000 people respond, and of those, we had 300 of them who agreed to participate in focus groups. So we will then we're getting ready to engage in that process, where we're going to have focus groups, probably about 10 focus groups, to talk about things like vaccine hesitancy, so that we can, as a community, know where we need to go, into the communities and talk to people, how to focus our messaging to be, more effective. So that's another one of the tools that we're using now.
That's great. And have you been doing these focus groups already, or are you just getting into that process?
We're just getting ready to start that process. We have just completed the survey analysis, and we'll be moving into the focus groups next.
Yeah, okay. I'm assuming that the county's got a strategic plan. Do you have metrics that are built into that plan relating to performance?
Yeah, yes, we do have a strategic plan with performance measures. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I got to say, this has been, we've been doing these panel conversations for a long time. The comments and your input and your perspectives have just been wonderful today. So thank you so much for that. I would like to just give you an opportunity, if you want to ask each other questions, now would be the best time to do that. Is there anything that comes to mind for anybody? All right. That's not a problem at all. Let me just kind of do a little bit of a wrap up then. First of all, thank you again for being part of this. There have been, hang on, I'm going to share my screen. There have been a variety of ways that you are addressing engagement with your residents in an authentic way. I love so many things that I heard about today, but the issues about consistent messaging and incorporating translation services so that you can reach all of your audiences. Natasha, your comment about the digital divide and the way that you're building in broadband access for new projects that are coming forward, just ways that you can help residents become more engaged and more connected with the residents, or with the issues that are impacting them on a day-to-day basis. I really resonated with the notion of paying attention to the services that local governments deliver to deal with issues that are going on today, and being able to kind of recognize that the ways that we do it today might not be the ways that we need to be doing it tomorrow, but that the only way that you can really understand what those issues are is if you are engaging and getting that input in a meaningful way. And Anna Silvia, I am really intrigued and impressed by the Connectors program. I think that is a model that a lot of communities will benefit hearing about, just because of the value that it brings by trusted community partners that are in the community, helping to make those connections at the appropriate spots and the appropriate time, and in a way that is authentic and meaningful on a relationship basis. So I think all of us and all of you shared the multifaceted need for how you engage, and that face-to-face and those relations that you build are probably the most important things that you can be doing. But you also recognize the value of technology and that the importance of getting deeper into the community with that technology. I'm very impressed, Michele, about your levels of participation that you have experienced working in a virtual world, and we'll love to follow up with you to see if that participation level has continued on in a new hybrid kind of a model. So there are great perspectives that you shared today, and I really want to just thank you for being part of the conversation. I'm going to be following up with each of you. Love to get some feedback on your experience with the panel today. We do these things every week, and so I would welcome you to, if there's somebody else that you know who might be interested or whose perspective would be valuable to the conversation, to get them in contact with me. We will be sharing these highlight segments of your comments on social media, on LinkedIn, and would welcome you and encourage you to share them with your networks as well, so that people who trust your opinions and your perspectives can have value in and benefit from the comments that you shared with us today. I have to say that I love these panel conversations because I get to meet wonderful leaders like yourself. It was really just a wonderful conversation with you this morning, and really appreciate you spending an hour with us to get to know each other a little bit better and to learn about what you're doing that's helping to move our communities forward. So thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to staying in contact with all of you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Michele and Natasha, for your wisdom and knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. It was a pleasure to meet you, Anna and Michele. Thank you both. And thank you for continuing to lead.
Thank you very much.